Hi, my name is Thalassa. My family told the world I was crazy. They whispered it behind closed doors, forged documents with my name, froze my accounts, even followed me with cameras. But it didn't start there. It started with a photo, a smile on Veterans Day, my father's hand on my shoulder. Now he's the man who tried to erase me. They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when blood becomes the poison? They didn't just want me silenced, they wanted me gone. And still, I stayed. Why? It was a Tuesday morning, chilly, with that crisp Colorado air that smells like pine and change. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was sorting through emails from a new defense policy brief I needed to summarize. I worked from home, tucked into a sunlit corner of my suburban house, a former Army brat turned strategic analyst in Homeland Security. My work had always grounded me: clarity, logic, systems. But that morning, nothing about what arrived in my mailbox made any sense. The envelope was heavier than usual, thick, official, embossed with the state seal. I stared at it for a few seconds too long, then peeled it open with my index finger. At first, the legal language made my eyes glaze over. Terms like petition for conservatorship, mental incompetency hearing, next of kin intervention. And then I saw his name, my father, petitioner, Richard Keene. I read it 3 times, but the meaning only became heavier. He was taking me to court. My own father was asking a judge to declare me mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. The same man who taught me how to change a tire at age 12, the same man who made me memorize Morse code before I could drive. That man now believed I was incapable of managing my own life. I wasn't spiraling, not exactly, but my mind felt like it was trying to stitch 2 realities together. One where I was a respected, competent analyst with top-level clearance, and one where I needed protection from myself. By mid-morning, I drove to my parents' house. A modest home, 2 streets over, lined with symmetrical rose bushes my mother trimmed with military precision. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching me approach. "Thalassa," she said, her voice as flat as the horizon. She stepped aside to let me in. I held up the envelope. "Do you know what this is?" She didn't take it, just turned and walked toward the kitchen. "Mom," I pressed, following her. "Dad filed to have me declared incompetent. This isn't some family intervention. It's legal." She opened a drawer and pulled out a tea bag. Chamomile. The calmest choice. "He's concerned," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Concerned?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is that what we're calling this now?" She turned to face me, finally, her mouth tightening. "He thinks you've been unstable since you left that last contract." I nearly laughed. "I chose not to renew. There's a difference. Sometimes what we think is choice is just avoidance," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I left without finishing the tea. That Sunday, we had dinner as a family, the kind where the air is too still and the clinking of forks feels like gunshots. My brother Marshall sat across from me, his eyes glued to his plate. Dana, his wife, made some offhand comment about how certain people always overreact. My father didn't even pretend to be surprised I showed up. He just passed the salt as if we were still the same old family with the same old rituals. No one mentioned the petition. No one asked how I was doing. It was like the legal papers didn't exist. After dinner, I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the family photo from 1994. Dad in his navy whites, Mom in a stiff floral dress, Marshall with a crooked smile, and me, the youngest, the only one not looking at the camera. Later that night, back home, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning like it could rewind time. My mind played back every recent encounter with my father, the way he'd asked odd questions about my finances, the way he'd dropped by unannounced, the way he told me I looked tired, worn down. He had been gathering evidence, not showing concern, surveillance, not support. I pulled out my old journal from the nightstand, the one with the leather cover I hadn't written in since Mom's surgery 3 years ago. I opened it to a fresh page. "I am not broken," I wrote. "I am not a liability. I'm a threat because I don't play by their rules." The next morning, I woke up to a sound, a soft thud, another envelope on the doormat. This one was thinner but more direct. No state seal, just the name of my father's attorney in the top left corner. I didn't open it. I stared at it for a full minute before whispering, "Let's see how far you're willing to go, Dad." The letter had been sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days unopened like a vulture waiting for a body. I had walked past it every morning, poured my coffee and stared at it as though it might catch fire on its own. This morning, though, I opened it, the seal cracked with a softness that betrayed its contents. The paper was thick, expensive, embossed with the insignia of a Denver-based law firm I knew before reading a single word that my father had chosen a firm that handled everything from wills to war crimes. The language was sharp, clinical, and full of phrases like progressive signs of diminished mental capacity and suggestion for guardianship based on recent behavioral irregularities. It cited my missing the HOA board meeting last month, which I had skipped to help a client launch their veterans' mental health nonprofit. They mentioned my refusal to attend Sunday dinners as evidence of withdrawal. My refusal. It made me laugh. I had stopped going because the silence around the dinner table was louder than any argument I could have mustered. There at the bottom was a court date in 3 weeks and a line that demanded my appearance with legal representation. The chair scraped back against the tile as I stood. My coffee had gone cold, but my blood was boiling. I needed to know how far this went and if I had already lost more than I realized. I grabbed my coat and keys and headed to Marshall's. His house was always tidy, too tidy like a staged home waiting for prospective buyers. Dana answered the door with a smile that felt like it had been carved from ice. "Marshall's upstairs," she said, nodding toward the hallway. I walked in, dropped my purse by the side table, and stood in the hallway outside his home office. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when you hear your name said in a hushed tone through a cracked door, something in your bones tells you not to move, not to breathe, not to blink. I heard my father's voice through the phone speaker, rough and unmistakable. "If we push just a little more, she'll cave." Marshall said nothing at first, but then replied, "She's already showing signs, just like you said, Dad." I felt like the hallway had tilted, like the floor had disappeared from beneath me. I turned slowly and walked out without saying a word. Dana didn't notice me leave, or if she did, she didn't care. Back home, I pulled up the shared family financial folder on my laptop. My fingers trembled as I navigated the archive. Something was missing. There had always been a subfolder titled Thalassa's Clause, referencing a stipulation in our family trust. It protected my share from being altered without my written consent. I remembered arguing with Uncle Ray about it a decade ago when I insisted on having it notarized separately. He had agreed with a smile and a half-joking, "You don't trust your father, do you?" I had laughed then. Now I clicked through my email history until I found it. An email from Uncle Ray dated 8 years ago with an attached scanned document, a clause highlighted in yellow. Protected, irrevocable unless revoked by beneficiary's signature, only. The clause was gone from the shared folder. Someone had deleted it. I drove across town to an assisted living community where Mrs. Dolores Brinkley now resided. She was the notary who had helped finalize the trust with Uncle Ray. She greeted me in a lavender sweater smelling faintly of peppermint and old leather. I explained what had happened, asked if she remembered the clause. She did. She closed her eyes, nodded slowly, and said, "Yes, child, I do remember that clause. You were very firm about it." I asked if she had any record of its removal. She didn't, but her voice shifted when she said, "Your father came by a few months ago with what looked like a signature copy. He claimed it was yours, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I didn't notarize it." She didn't use the word forged, but it echoed in the space between us. I thanked her, hugged her frail frame, and left feeling like the earth had cracked just enough to swallow something important. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to myself, not one for court or lawyers, just a letter, a list of the things they had tried to take from me, my peace, my privacy, my identity. And under that list, I wrote, "They won't steal my clarity." I folded it twice, slid it behind an old photograph of me as a young cadet in uniform. My father's arm slung around my shoulder like a rope, rain pattered softly against the window pane of my childhood home, the steady rhythm seeping into my bones as I climbed the creaky attic stairs. The scent of old cedar and memories curled around me, but I reminded myself I was here to help my mother clear out space, not to drown in the past. His absence was a relief and a torment all at once. My father was away at a veterans ceremony, and I used that lull to slip into his study, where I noticed the new lock, fresh, precise, and unsettling, keeping me out of the one drawer that had always been ajar. My heart pounded with a mix of defiance and suspicion as I pocketed a thin set of lockpicks, acquired long ago in a moment of preparation. Inside the desk, I found what I feared: a file marked contingency, guardianship request, adult dependent clause, effective upon signs of emotional instability. The paper was worn, dated 5 years ago, with words like pattern of instability and preemptive legal authority printed in official type. I could taste betrayal in each phrase, each thin line calculating what rights I didn't know I could lose. Memories bubbled up. Years ago, I strayed into the backyard, hearing my father discuss control and order with his old military buddy as shadows and heated words slipped through the screen door. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Dad was always firm. But now I heard that statement as a veiled entrance to manipulation, a plan I was only seeing edgewise. When I finally told Mom, she didn't gasp. She just closed her eyes, folding her hands tightly. I signed one of those papers. I didn't know what it was at the time, she confessed, in a voice that trembled under the weight of guilt and fear. She said she didn't understand legal language well enough back then, that she'd trusted him, but hearing the truth now, she regretted letting that trust outshine her instincts. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. Instead, I stood in a quiet fury holding paper fragments of betrayal. I thanked her for being honest, and I left the house before the rain could dull my resolve. At home, I took photos of the old files, fingerprints and stamps and all, and saved them to a hidden, encrypted drive, evidence of what they planned, what they tried to hide. A week passed and I felt myself shifting. I wasn't seeking understanding. I was moving into power. The night I uploaded the files, I wrote one line in a draft email to myself. I am my own authority now. The next morning, I deleted it, strong enough to carry it inside instead of in words. The courtroom was cold, not from the temperature, but from the silence that wrapped around me like a wet wool blanket. I sat alone on the left side, my lawyer just a formality next to me. Across the room, my father's posture was rigid and comfortable, as if he were sitting at the head of our old dinner table again, not in a legal proceeding that questioned my autonomy. The judge hadn't looked at me once, not really. His eyes had scanned me, cataloged my expression, but never settled there long enough to feel human. I caught my father's smirk as his attorney stood and spoke. Your Honor, in the interest of protecting the family's reputation and preventing undue influence on public opinion, we are filing a gag order. It wasn't just a legal move, it was a command to stay invisible. The moment the judge nodded, I wasn't just silenced, I was erased. Back home, I stared at the pages of the gag order spread out on my dining table. The language was surgical, clean. Restrained from public commentary regarding any matter related to the petitioner. Prohibited from discussing pending legal actions with external parties, including but not limited to clients, media, or colleagues. The list went on, wrapping itself around my throat. My phone buzzed with a reminder. Client consultation with Jefferson Tech at 3 p.m. I deleted it. How could I sit in a strategy meeting when the strategy for my life was being rewritten without me? By evening, I'd already sent out 3 cancellation emails and ignored 5 voicemails. Each silence was another confirmation. I wasn't being protected. I was being isolated, undermined, dismantled professionally until all that remained was a woman with a label someone else had chosen. The email came at 2:17 a.m. No subject, no name, just a message. If you're smart enough to find this, you're smart enough to question Dr. Marin. I blinked. My heart kicked once, hard. The name Dr. Marin was familiar now, scrawled across the psychologist's report submitted to the court. According to that report, I displayed emotional fragility, difficulty in maintaining structured cognitive reasoning, and prolonged dissociation under stress. They'd made me sound like a broken window in a storm. I clicked the email again, rereading the final line. Start with the licensing board. My laptop opened before I fully registered what I was doing. My fingers flew. Colorado Board of Psychologist Examiners. I typed in Marin's full name, No results. I cross-checked it with national registries. Again, nothing. The pit in my stomach grew teeth. The next day was consumed by research. By lunch, I had Marin's LinkedIn profile. The school listed, Midwestern Behavioral Institute, sounded official, but a quick search confirmed it had shut down years ago after multiple investigations. I called the university it had supposedly merged with. The registrar's voice was brisk. We have no record of a Dr. Marin ever receiving credentials through us. I hung up. My hands were shaking. This wasn't negligence. This was strategic fraud, a planted expert witness with no real standing. I pulled out my old work camera, the one I used for PR testimonials. I sat in front of it, pressed record, and said my name. I detailed everything, the court order, the business losses, Marin's false identity. My voice cracked once, but I didn't stop. I encrypted the file and uploaded it to a secure drive. Then I backed it up. Twice. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with the gag order in one hand and Marin's fake report in the other. I thought about silence. How often women are asked to swallow it, to sit still, to let the storm pass. I whispered to the empty room, "You want silence? You'll get thunder." Then I picked up my phone, scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years, Amelia Reeve. She was a journalist now, but she'd once been my client. I'd helped her navigate a PR disaster when her book release collided with a family scandal. She owed me one. I didn't say much when she picked up. Just 3 words. "Off the record?" There was a pause. Then her voice, calm and sharp as ever. "I'm listening." I didn't want to go. That dinner invitation felt less like a request and more like an ambush. Still, I needed clarity, so I changed into something simple, walked in under the chandelier's soft glow, and reminded myself I was there to unmask, not to be silent. The house smelled like roast beef and polished wood, the perfect setting for a facade. My father stood tall, shaking hands with fellow veterans, the hush-hush respect hovering like a halo. Guests nodded respectfully, unaware that beneath the veneer was a battle waiting to erupt, one I had fueled with evidence they still hadn't seen. When I entered, all eyes subtly shifted. I heard a quiet exhale, the stretch of chandelier light as faces traced contours. He sat at the head of the table, as he always did, toes planted in legacy. There was a framed photo on the wall, him in marine dress whites, young and sharp. Now I saw it as a monument to what he'd traded for pride. My brother Marshall sat near him, the golden sun again with a stiff smile. Mom hovered in the kitchen shadows. When dessert was about to be served, I stood. Silence sharpened in the room. I laid down a folder of documents, trust files, email exchanges, notarized clauses. I looked at my father calmly and said, "I know you forged my consent." Mothers gasped. One of the veterans leaned forward. My father's shoulders didn't straighten or sink. He just stared, unreadable, as if I offered him a mirror he didn't recognize. Then Marshall spoke, his voice louder than intention. "This is absurd. You're making this up, trying to rewrite your own story because you want attention. We've all watched you spiral." He folded his hands, satisfied with the scripted cruelty. Mom vanished. Her chair slid back too quietly. I felt the sting, no surprise, just the ache of betrayal from the person meant to have my back. I stood rooted for a moment, then walked to the front door. The framed photo caught my eye. I hovered, turned, and whispered, "You were supposed to protect me." The words floated off, unheard. And I crossed the threshold into cold night air, letting the driveway swallow my tears, and only then did I let them fall. When the phone rang, I nearly let it go to voicemail. I'd been screening everything lately, calls, emails, even text messages, but something in my gut told me to answer. It was Sandra. I hadn't heard from her in almost a year, not since we'd wrapped up the PR launch for her interior design firm. Her voice was tentative, unusually careful. "I didn't want to call," she said, "but I thought you should know. Your father's legal team reached out to me." My spine straightened. I didn't say anything, just waited. "They asked if I'd be willing to submit a statement about your mental fitness." They mentioned the time you missed that meeting in Denver, said they had evidence you were unraveling. The air in my lungs froze. That meeting had been a year ago. I'd had the flu. I'd emailed Sandra to reschedule. She hadn't cared, until now. I told them no, she continued. But Thalassa, they're building something, and it's not small. After we hung up, I sat at the edge of the couch, staring at my reflection in the dark TV screen. My hands trembled. Not from fear, not entirely, from rage. He was weaponizing my life, my history, my work, my voice, and reshaping it into something fragile, something he could crush. The next morning, I sat across from Julia, my lawyer, her office cold and uninviting, filled with binders and court calendars. She pulled up a file on her screen and rotated it toward me. "Emergency guardianship," she said. "Filed yesterday. They're fast-tracking it, citing emotional instability and erratic professional behavior." I stared at the document, trying to absorb its language. Words like unfit, potential threat, in need of intervention, flashed like warning lights, pages of allegations, half-truths twisted into red flags. Mentions of therapy appointments, an old prescription for anxiety, the missed meeting Sandra had just mentioned. "They're painting a picture," Julia said, "and if we don't counter it aggressively, a judge could appoint a guardian by next week." "Without a hearing?" I asked. "With minimal process. They'll call it urgent. Say it's to protect you." I laughed, sharp, bitter. From myself? From the courthouse, I drove home on autopilot, the edges of my vision hazy. Mail waited in the box by my door. I pulled it out mechanically, flipping through bills and coupons until I came to an unmarked envelope. No return address, no stamp, just my name, printed in neat black ink. Inside were photographs, printed on glossy paper. Me, from across the street, walking out of my therapist's office. Another buying wine at the grocery store. Talking to Tom, the handyman in my building. And the last, me at my front door, keys in hand, time-stamped just yesterday. My fingers gripped the edges of the photos until they bent. I backed into my apartment, locked the door, bolted it, then stared out the peephole. Nothing but hallway, empty and humming with fluorescent light. This wasn't just legal warfare anymore. This was surveillance, psychological intimidation. And it was working. My breath came shallow and quick, my thoughts spiraling. I sat on the floor, photos in one hand, phone in the other. My father's voice echoed in my memory, years ago on a camping trip when I was 12. "Never let anyone own your silence," he'd said as we packed up our gear. "Silence is power, but only if it's yours." Now he was trying to own mine. I began sorting through old contracts, client testimonials, email chains with therapists. I built a digital wall, evidence, timelines, affidavits. I called Julia, dictated notes for our response. Then I opened a private server I hadn't used in years and uploaded everything. Around midnight, I pulled out the photos again. This time I didn't shake. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. If they wanted war, they'd get one. Not the kind waged in boardrooms or behind courtroom doors. The kind that starts in whispers and ends in testimony. The kind where truth doesn't scream, it stands still and waits to be seen. I opened my laptop and typed one line into a new file. "They want silence. Let's answer with thunder." I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating violently against the nightstand. Texts, calls, notifications. At first I thought something terrible had happened overnight, but it was worse than I imagined. My name, my face, were smeared across the top banner of a celebrity gossip site under the headline, "Estranged daughter accused of elder abuse and mental breakdown." I blinked hard, rereading the subtext. Sources close to the family say Thalassa Keene may be suffering from emotional delusions. The bile rose so fast I had to steady myself. I scrolled through the article, heart hammering. There were excerpts pulled from court documents, twisted half-truths stitched into a damning narrative. A quote from an anonymous family source claimed I had once thrown a chair during an argument, a fabrication built on nothing. And there, at the bottom, a line that froze my veins. Attempts to reach her brother, Marshall, for comment were declined, which was as good as confirmation. I didn't have time to wallow. Julia's name lit up my screen, and I picked up on the second ring. "Don't say anything publicly," she said before even greeting me. "They're baiting you." But that wasn't all. Julia had more news, and this time it was Marshall's doing. He had filed an emergency motion to freeze my business accounts. The paperwork accused me of misusing family assets. I hadn't touched a penny from them since I was 21. He cited my therapy bills, my travel to conferences, even my recent hardware purchase as signs of erratic spending. By the time I opened my business dashboard, the damage was done, payment processing halted, client invoices suspended, my income frozen like the November wind clawing at my apartment windows. The sense of panic came in pulses. First my name, now my livelihood. They were erasing me piece by piece. That afternoon, a name I hadn't heard in 15 years popped up on my screen. Aaron Delgado. I stared at it like a ghost had phoned me. Aaron had been a quiet presence in our lives when I was younger, an old military buddy of my father's, once close enough to join us on 4th of July barbecues. His message was brief. "Heard what's happening. Can we talk?" We met at a small cafe downtown, tucked away from the main roads. Aaron looked older, but sharper too. "I've been out of the loop," he said, "but I saw the article. I know your father. He's not one to fight fair." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let my guard down. But Julia's warning rang in my ears. No one just shows up now without a reason. Still, I listened. He leaned in. "You need someone watching your back. I'm not looking for anything from you. I couldn't stay quiet." He offered to look into things quietly, people he still knew on the inside. I said I'd think about it. That night I called Marshall. I wish I hadn't. I kept it short, asking why he was doing this. His tone was almost bored. "Maybe you need help, Thalassa. You sound paranoid." "You're freezing my accounts," I snapped. "I'm protecting the family from embarrassment, from you." I could hear the click of his mouse in the background, like I was an inconvenience he had to deal with between spreadsheet tabs. I hit record halfway through the conversation, catching him saying, "Maybe Dad was right all along. You need someone to make decisions for you." I sent the file to Julia without comment. Her response was terse. "This helps. Not enough, but it helps." By morning I had to decide, run or resist. The urge to disappear was strong. I could leave town, start over. I even looked up short-term rentals in places no one would think to look for me. But as I packed a duffel bag, I glanced at the mirror. They want me erased. That's exactly why I won't go. The courtroom door felt heavier than usual, like it knew the weight of what I carried inside. The air was thick with hushed tension as I stepped through, my heels echoing with finality on the polished tile. I clutched the manila folder tighter, the original legal document inside, nearly burning through my fingers. Every row of seats was filled. Neighbors from my childhood street, a few gray-haired veterans in pressed blazers, even Dana sat stiffly in the corner with her arms crossed. They all turned as I passed. I met no one's gaze. The judge hadn't yet entered, but my father already occupied his seat at the petitioner's table. Calm, calculated, he sat straight with his lawyer whispering beside him. Marshall wasn't beside them this time. He sat a few rows back, tapping something on his phone. My mother, on the other hand, sat in the back corner, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. My attorney Julia leaned toward me as I took my seat. "Ready?" she whispered. "No," I said, steadying my breath. "But I'm here." The judge entered and all rose. As we settled, my name was read into the record. My father's lawyer stood, again accusing me of erratic behavior and digital manipulation of legal records. Julia let them finish. Then she stood. "Your Honor, we request to introduce Exhibit 4, she said, her voice steady. She gestured for me to approach. I rose and walked to the bench, my every step silent and deliberate. I handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He opened it, time stretched. "This document," Julia continued, "is the original notarized clause from the family trust. dated, signed, and filed 5 years ago. It clearly stipulates that any modification requires my client's direct and written consent. The judge flipped pages. His brow furrowed, then lifted. He looked up, first at Julia, then at me, then at my father. "This contradicts the version you filed," he said, turning toward the petitioner's table. My father's lawyer stammered. We were under the impression the updated file superseded this one." "Who provided the updated version?" the judge asked, sharply. My father's mouth opened, then closed. "I did," his lawyer admitted after a beat. "Mr. Keene delivered the file to our office. We had no reason to question its authenticity." The judge set the folder down. "Well, now we do." I didn't dare move. I stood, heart thudding, while the silence thickened. "In light of this document," the judge said, "the court finds sufficient reason to invalidate the guardianship petition. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential fraud." His gaze sharpened. "You may wish to retain separate counsel, Mr. Keene." The moment the words left his mouth, the courtroom erupted. Not loudly, but with that collective breath people take when truth slices clean. My father didn't flinch. He sat rigid, stone-faced. But I saw it. The micro-expression, the twitch at the corner of his eye. That was the crack. Then came another voice. "Your Honor." Everyone turned. It was my mother. She rose slowly, her voice fragile but audible. I don't mean to interrupt, but if it matters, I knew what he was doing." I stared at her, frozen. "I didn't know how far he would take it," she said, "but I knew the clause was real, and I didn't say anything." Her chin trembled, but she didn't sit. I was afraid. "But I can't watch him bury her, not anymore." The judge said nothing. No one did. My mother lowered herself back into her seat, staring straight ahead, her hands still folded but trembling now. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. It whipped around me as I stepped out onto the stone steps. Julia was speaking beside me, but I couldn't hear her through the static in my head. My fingers still pressed into the folder like I needed proof I'd made it through. In the empty hallway just before exiting, I stopped. My reflection stared back from the glass pane of the courthouse doors, tired, red-eyed, but standing. The storm finally broke. Morning light drifted in gently through my blinds, soft and forgiving. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, inhaling the calm like relief, a clean page finally. On the kitchen counter lay an envelope, handwritten, and not from a network, just my name. Inside, an invitation for a televised interview. The wording was polite, even hopeful, but I didn't open it, I just stared. The temptation to tell my story, on my terms, was strong, but I'd already shown what mattered. The truth had overturned lies. I stepped out into the hallway, brushing past the photograph of me in military-style uniform, arm draped over my shoulder like a promise. No, my future didn't need the spotlight. Each box I opened in the living room felt like clearing a circuit. Old letters with my mother's messy script, my father's medals in velvet boxes, a cheap snow globe from our old home. I touched each thing, holding memory. Some I kept. A letter from a niece, a press badge from my first big briefing. Others I tucked away. There was no need for excess grief to wear my heart thin. I left the rest behind, stepping out into the crisp air of Boulder. Grace was waiting for me at our usual booth in the diner. When I sat down, she checked me over with her eyes. Not the pity of a friend, but something warmer. She told me about her kids, their kindergarten recital, her latest fundraising for the VA drive. The stories didn't drown in grief, they ended in laughter. She nudged her coffee cup toward mine. "I thought you might write again," she said. I nodded. "I might volunteer at the VA, offer what I can." She didn't look surprised. She just smiled. "You'll always give, Thalassa." We didn't talk about the court or the petition or the award invitations piling up in the news apps. Instead, we remembered the summers we spent camping, how I taught her to spot constellations in our old backyard. I told her how much I'd learned about myself losing everything, how roots don't cut easy. Later, I returned to that envelope. Beneath the formal tone was a media's hope for a redemption story, a tale of comeback and forgiveness. My last job had been PR. I knew how to shape narratives. But some stories are better left whispered between old friends. I wrote a brief reply. Thank you, but I'm not interested. Not now. Signed, Thalassa. No applause was needed. My story mattered most to me, and I'd lived it quietly, with truth, without the fanfare. I walked home under golden leaves drifting from the trees, each flutter like a quiet welcome. The past had walked beside me all this way. I smiled. The past no longer held my hand. I chose to walk beside it instead. The house didn't make a sound when I stepped inside, but somehow it still felt like it sighed. Maybe it was just me, exhaling for the first time in days. The air was colder than I remembered, tinged with that faint must of old carpets and forgotten corners. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just echoes. The place was nearly empty now. Only the attic left, packed with remnants no one wanted to claim but me. I made my way up the narrow staircase, each creak beneath my boots sounding like the ticking of a clock winding down. The attic door groaned as I pushed it open. It smelled like cedar and dust and something older than either. The light slanted in through the side window, falling on boxes labeled in my father's sharp, military handwriting. Tools, awards, photos. One box caught my eye. It had no label, no tape, just a brass latch, slightly rusted with time. I knelt and opened it. Inside lay a collection of yellowed letters, faded photographs, and near the bottom, a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked at the spine. My name was nowhere on it, but I knew it was his. I could feel his presence in the neat, precise strokes of his handwriting on the first page. I didn't mean to read it. Not really. I told myself I'd just glance. Just see what kind of man he was when no one else was watching. But once I started, I couldn't stop. October 12th, 6 years ago. I watched Thalassa today at her presentation. She spoke like a general, but her heart, it's too big for this world. I worry it will get her hurt. I wonder if I've made her soft by trying to make her strong. July 7th, 4 years ago. She didn't answer my call. I think she knows I read the therapist's email. I didn't mean to invade. I wanted to understand. She scares me sometimes, how much she keeps locked up. Entry after entry peeled back layers I didn't know existed. He wasn't just a man obsessed with control, he was terrified of losing what he loved. And somewhere in that terror, he became someone I had to fight. He never said he regretted it. But the guilt was there, scrawled in margins, tangled in scratched out lines. I sat by the fireplace with the journal resting in my lap. The last entry was dated just a day before his heart attack. She is the strongest person I've ever known, but I think I broke something in her. I hope someday she knows I saw her, all of her. The tears didn't come fast. They came quietly, like mist gathering on the inside of a window. I wasn't sobbing. I wasn't shattered. I was something softer than I'd been in a long time. And that softness didn't feel like surrender, it felt like release. I could finally stop running mental marathons, trying to make sense of the man who raised me. I could stop tallying injustices like battle wounds. I could hold this truth. He loved me, deeply, imperfectly, quietly. I placed the journal on the mantel above the empty hearth. A gesture of peace, not approval, not forgiveness, just peace. As I closed the door behind me for the last time, I didn't feel like I was leaving him or the past inside those walls. I felt like I was carrying something forward, something earned, something seen, something heard. I didn't plan to end up on a train blanket with moving snow smudging the window beside me, but there I was, heading from Atlanta toward Boston. The ticket felt more like an invitation to move forward, to finally stop spinning. I'd left the station with my father's journal tucked into my coat, heart lighter but still hard as steel. The whistle blew, the wheels turned, and with that gentle thrum came the first breath of a path I hadn't known I needed. I was halfway into rereading a scribbled page when a familiar voice across the aisle stopped time. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Captain Drew stood there, silver hair under a crumpled cap, the kind of figure you remember. Not the face, the essence of years carrying secrets. I nodded, words gone. He sat, presence softer than I expected. We rode on until the dining car, where the world softened with glass and bourbon. Later, glass in hand, he slipped into the story I thought I understood. "Your father made a choice," he said quietly. "He disobeyed direct orders to save civilians caught in crossfire. He lost medals over it. He lost peace." My breath caught. I'd spent years thinking of him as cold control, not sacrifice wrapped in regret. He told me how the father I had fought against was hiding guilt in his jawline, how he carried those ghosts because he'd always cared more about right than command. I stood there, hearing a man defending my father's heart. It was a quiet kind of revelation, simple, soft, but changing everything. Later, I pulled out my pen and scrawled into the last page of his journal. "Your silence was your sacrifice. I hear you now." I closed it, slow and gentle, as if sealing a promise. Outside, Boston's lights were approaching, soft in the dark sky. The train slowed, rhythm shifting. I tucked the journal close to my chest, not hiding it, carrying it. My phone buzzed with messages, nothing urgent. But inside me, the tremor of a new story starting. Sometimes answers come from voices you never thought to listen to. The Boston winter morning was crisp enough to carve clarity. Outside the Federal Veterans Headquarters, the sidewalk glittered with fresh snow. I could feel the chill seeping through the glass as I stepped through the mirrored entryway, carrying more than the file in my coat. It was all the truth I'd gathered, whispering justice. Captain Drew had approached me the night before on the train, his quiet voice insistent. "He's not who you think." In his hand was a sealed envelope containing the name and office of a decorated official in Boston, a national hero who now sat above accountability, shielded by medals and rhetoric. The internal memo in the envelope tied him directly to my father's failed deployment, revealing orders to cover up a massacre rather than protect innocent lives. I'd stared at the name. Brigadier General Mason. The same man being feted in halls I walked now. My entrance felt surreal. The building was cavernous, spotless, elegant surfaces meant to inspire awe, not shield cowardice. As I stepped into the reception area, framed posters lauded Mason's public works. He stood there, a pillar of decorum in uniform, shaking hands and greeting families. Veterans snapped photos with him. I felt the difference between performance and presence sting. Pulling the memo from my coat, I handed it to the security officer at the entrance, saying I had an urgent statement for the general. He frowned, glanced at the memo, and waved me through. Inside, the corridor echoed emptily. I followed signs to Brigadier General Mason, office. My steps were deliberate, measured. I'd rehearsed these words in my head, but the real ones felt sharper than I expected. His door opened before I raised my hand. He stood there, crisp uniform impeccable. Silence stretched. I pulled the memo and handed it to him without speaking. His eyes flickered. Vertices of composure cracked. "This," I began calmly, "is the order you signed, intending to bury a story, bury people, for your promotion." I watched his face as he read. Then I read it aloud. "In the interest of unit cohesion, any civilian casualties must be classified, suppressed." My voice echoed off cold marble. When he looked up, his hands trembled. "That document. It's classified," he said, blinking. "The only thing covering up here is your guilt," I answered. "You buried the dead so you could rise." He swallowed. His composure unraveled into something raw and human. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of every life he betrayed. I took out my phone and pressed stream. I spoke to the Veteran Advocacy Network waiting online. "This document exposes the real man behind the whistle," I said, eyes steady. The stream rippled across feeds. In the corridor, boots trudged but too late. The truth had slipped out. Veterans peered around corners. They whispered. He covered it up. Mason's face surrendered into grief as security approached. He was led away, not proudly. His medals gleamed in the harsh light, now symbols of silence. Stepping outside, snow crunched underfoot. The cold didn't bite. It purified. I took out a photo of my father in uniform, the one tucked in my coat. I held it against the freezing air. He died for his conscience, I whispered. You will live haunted by yours. The snow reflected city lights, soft and forgiving. I carried the photo forward, not hidden, but honored. Later, I stood quietly at the military memorial near the common. I knelt and placed my father's journal there. I whispered, "You didn't need to scream. Your actions did." The stone guardian rested above, silent witness. When I stood, the snow still fell. I walked away. No rage, no sorrow, only freedom. My head high, heart at peace. I wasn't broken, and I wasn't haunted. I was finally free. What my father left behind wasn't just a journal. It was a mirror, a reflection of what fear can twist, and what love can still redeem even in silence. I used to think strength was about not breaking, but I've learned that real strength is choosing to rise after everything's been broken, especially when no one is watching. To anyone out there who has felt betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, let me tell you this. Your truth matters. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to refuse to disappear. The silence they try to bury you in can become the ground you build your strength on. Maybe you're standing at your own kind of threshold right now. Maybe you're wondering if it's worth fighting when you feel so alone. I've been there. And if I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it'd be this. Never hand your voice to someone else's comfort. Use it, even if it shakes. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story hit home the most? Have you ever had to choose between peace and pride? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, or just tell me where you're watching from. And if this story touched you, type 1 in the comments. And if it didn't resonate, I'd still love to hear why. Every perspective matters here. And if you're still with me right now, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We're just getting started.